All right, what's going on, everybody? Good morning. Back again. Uh, usually when someone tells one lie, more often than not, that one lie leads to another without question. I mean, if you look back at people that you've dealt with that have been dishonest with you, they usually haven't been dishonest with you that one time that you've found out they were dishonest with you. When you uncover one lie, you tend to uncover many, many more, and many, many more of those lies tend to lead to others. So, Bob Arum, it seems as though his motives have been called into question here, not just by me, but many others here on YouTube and in the boxing world. Um, this whole situation with the arbitration, this whole situation with Fury Joshua, Fury Wilder, it's a big mess right now. And you have to ask yourself, how did we get here? Now, Bob Arum is not a stupid person. This is a former U.S. federal district court lawyer. It's not just some ambulance chaser. He's not a Feinstein and For Lizzie guy on one of those late night shows. You see those advertisers for those types of lawyers. He's a reputable he was a reputable lawyer. So he's not a stupid man. He understands law, and he pretty much has dealt with contracts his whole life. Dealt with contracts his whole life. So for him to really not understand what was going on, or for him to not really know or have strong suspicions on how this whole situation with Wilder was going to play out, it's just hard to believe. It's just totally disingenuous. So a lot of people are unhappy with the mega fight between Fury and Joshua not happening. But as I said, I'm not smarter than anyone, but there were a lot of red flags. A lot of red flags. Um, these guys, Arum, um, Eddie Hearn, and Frank Warren, they've been involved in many big events over the course of their careers. They know how to put on a big fight, and the way this whole thing was delayed, and not only with the arbitration, but the issue with um, the proof of funds. There's so many things that I've heard that were being labeled as just minor details, minor problems, but they really weren't. They really weren't. So the wool was being pulled over our eyes, I think, from just about everybody here. I think the only person, in my opinion, who wasn't really complicit in this, to be perfectly honest with you, was Anthony Joshua. He's the one guy in this whole situation because he didn't say much. All he did was train. He went to the gym. He was preparing for Fury or whoever was going to come his way. And Fury was training as well. But as I said, there were a lot of red flags in regards to this whole situation. And if you paid attention to them and you actually looked and analyzed these red flags, it would be almost impossible to not be skeptical of the whole unification super fight right from pretty much the beginning. So, red flag number one was the expiration of this rematch clause. Now, as I said, one lie usually leads to another and another and another. So when you find deception, there's usually more deception that follows, right? Because you got to tell another lie to cover up the original lie that you first told. I'm not even sure there was an expiration on this rematch clause right from the beginning, because think about this. First off, Arum said that the expiration date on this contract was October, right? He said it was in October, which was, I believe, last October. That's what he was trying to say, that the expiration was in October. So if the expiration date was in October, then why did you go ahead and schedule a December fight? Because then he floated out a December date that he was trying to say that he was trying to nail down a December date, and that's when he wanted the fight to be. But then he said, "Well, we can't do that fight because we can't put it in front of a live audience, right?" So if the expiration date was in October, then why did you go ahead and schedule a December date? And then you went ahead and also made statements that, okay, well, we don't want to put it in December because we still can't put this in front of a live crowd. We'll just do it in February, possibly. That's the next possible date. That's the next date we're gonna work on. Okay. So if this expiration clause, so you say, right? If this expiration clause, so you say, was in October, then why did you float out a December date? Why did you float out a February date? If the contract was supposed to be, or the rematch clause, I should say, was supposed to have expired in October, then why were you still negotiating with Deontay Wilder's team after October? Why were you still talking about the rematch after October? November and December, you were saying, yeah, we're gonna try to put this fight on in December, and then towards the end of December, you were saying, okay, well, it looks like we're not going to be able to put it on in December. We're going to shoot for February, and then I think maybe February comes around, and then all of a sudden you start talking about Joshua Fury. And it's kind of funny how he kept saying all along that, this fight with Fury and Joshua wasn't going to happen. Eddie Hearn is being overly optimistic here. The fight's dead in the water. He was being accused of being negative all along, right? All along. And then the week before arbitration, all of a sudden he starts saying positive things about the fight. That's a little bit odd, isn't it? So all along he was saying that the fight wasn't going to happen. And then right right before the arbitration was announced, right? Then he starts saying positive things about it. And then Tyson Fury starts saying positive things about it. It's kind of bizarre, right? It's kind of bizarre, right? So now the narrative I'm thinking they're trying to put out to the naive fans who have been manipulated all along here is, yeah, we really wanted to put this fight on, but we couldn't because the arbiter ruled. He ruled that we have to have this third fight with Wilder. We never anticipated. We thought that we were going to win this arbitration all along. But once again, Bob Arum was not just a lawyer. This was a U.S. federal district court lawyer. He worked for the U.S. government. He was a federal lawyer. He wasn't just some ham and egger. He was a federal lawyer. So for him to not really think that there was going to be an issue with this arbitration, and then the arbiter, we come to find, is the same person he's dealt with in the past when he had issues with Nonito Donaire, when Nonito Donaire tried to get out his contract. So Bob Arum has a history with this arbiter. So they kind of know each other. Well, they don't kind of know, they know each other. And we can even go as far as maybe suspecting that they may have a friendly relationship. Again, I stress the word suspect. We don't know. So to sit there and believe that this came out of left field, it just doesn't add up. It does not make sense. It's quite clear, and people are saying it now, but I was saying it months ago. And shout out to M Stacks because initially I thought that this unification could happen because my take on the whole thing was I didn't think Wilder wanted a third fight because he stayed silent so long. He was injured. Maybe he wanted to rehab after the surgery that he had. I didn't think Wilder thought that he was ready for a third fight and he wanted to take some time off and come back and get a tune-up in. But once I was aware and I realized that Wilder did want the third fight, I said to myself, it's going to be hard for them to deny that. And Bob Arum, no, I think Bob Arum again knew all along that this arbiter was going to rule in this, in this way. He knew that this third fight was going to happen, but all he was doing was to keep pushing it off, pushing it off, pushing it off. Because what was the key phrase or the key sentence that he kept telling everybody? We have to put this fight in front of a live audience. Couldn't do it in October. Couldn't do it in September. Excuse me. Couldn't do it in October. Couldn't do it in December, and could not do it in February. So he waited until the country opened up again. And May 29th, the country is going to open up in Massachusetts. The mask mandate has been lifted in Vegas. And from what I heard, June 2nd, the state of emergency is going to be lifted. Las Vegas is going to be fully open. The Raiders Stadium has already been reserved for July 24th, according to reports. So Bob Arum knew what the results of this arbitration was going to be. And I'm hearing things like, well, Wilder doesn't, why should Wilder fight Fury a third time? The second fight was so one-sided. I think it was a 7th round TKO. And then we can just look at Joshua Ruiz and say, well, why did Joshua get a rematch? Oh, well, that fight was more competitive. What does that mean? The fight was more competitive. They were both 7-round stoppages. Okay. I think Joshua took far more damage in his loss than Wilder did. And people were saying, oh, well, Joshua just wasn't right for that fight. Well, maybe Wilder wasn't right for that second fight. And you can argue he lost the first fight. I thought Wilder lost the first fight. Okay. I had it 9-3. But again, he did prove that if he hurts Fury, that he could possibly end the fight. That 12th round is always an option, or is always a possibility, I should say. It's always a possibility that 12th round could reoccur against anybody. And Fury did get up. I think he followed the count, but it was so close. But that was like the closest I've ever seen to someone getting knocked out without getting knocked out. So for me to just sit here and say, I mean, I think Fury will win the third fight. Okay. But for me to just say that automatically Wilder has 0 chance, you can't on one hand say that Joshua deserved his rematch with Ruiz and now say that Wilder doesn't deserve his rematch with Fury. It's very similar situations, and we can argue, oh, well, Joshua's fight was more competitive. Was it? But again, was it like it was competitive until it wasn't competitive? I mean, let's be honest. After that 6th round, when you saw Joshua really not in the fight, the writing was on the wall. I mean, he had to go to the hospital after the fight. He was concussed, according to Eddie Hearn and many others. So he took tons of damage in that fight. And some people were even saying Maybe he needs a break. Maybe he needs a tune-up before going into the rematch with Ruiz. But they were also saying if he feels as though he's ready, then he should fight him. So people were questioning Anthony Joshua's condition after that fight and whether or not he was going to be ready or he was in, he should take the rematch. But they also, along with that statement, would say, well, since he signed the rematch clause, it's up to him if he wants to go ahead with that fight. Only he knows. But from a lot of people's opinions, and even myself, I thought he took so much damage in that fight that he possibly would not have been the same in the rematch. And and he wasn't the same in the rematch because he fought like a guy who was very cautious. Doesn't matter. He won the fight 9 rounds to 3 on my card. Doesn't matter. But, you know, that fight with Ruiz did have an effect on him. And even in the Pulev fight, it looked like he was being cautious in that fight as well. But because Pulev was just so overly matched, at some point he was going to catch a big punch and he was going to get taken out of there. But it took Joshua a little bit of time, and it almost looked like he was being hesitant and overly defensive at points in that fight. But that's neither here nor there. This whole argument that, okay, well, that fight was more competitive than Wilder versus Fury. But we can always go back to all of Wilder's fights. How many times can we look at Wilder's fights and he'll be losing badly on the cards, or at least he should be losing badly on the cards if you score the fight properly. He lost the majority of the rounds against Luis Ortiz too, right? I had him losing rounds to Spilka. I had him down on that fight. I had him down in the Gerald Washington fight. So Wilder's always down in fights. He's always losing badly on the scorecards. Not always, but a lot of times. But that one punch has bailed him out on more than one occasion. So to just sit there and say, well, just because Wilder loses rounds and gives away rounds and he depends on that one punch. Well, that one punch has served him well in all of his fights except for one. So to sit there and just dismiss Wilder 100% when you didn't dismiss Joshua, I think it's a double standard. I think it's hypocritical. That's my opinion. So do I hate this third fight? I don't. I actually like this third fight better now than I would have if it were to happen in October or December, because now Wilder is fully rested. He's had some time to heal up his body, to recover. I believe he went into that fight recovering from a bicep tendon injury in the left arm, and I think he exacerbated that injury even more during that fight. Not making excuses. I'm just making an observation. Shout out to Evan Young, person I've known for many years. He actually texted me after the weigh-in and said, Joe, did you notice that Deontay Wilder's left arm looked a little swollen? It looked inflamed. So he could have injured that bicep tendon. It could have been strained. It could have had a minor tear in it. And then during the fight, it could have gotten worse. Now, got the surgery, had plenty of time to rehab and recover from that. He's training with Malik Scott. I'm not sure that's going to be a benefit to him, but he does look better now. He looks a little more fluid throwing those punches on the pads, whatever. Whether that means anything or not, who knows? But I will say this, and this is my opinion. I think he will lose the third fight. I'm going to pick Fury to win the third fight, but I don't expect him to win it in the same fashion that he won the second fight. It could be a lot more competitive this time around. It could be a lot more competitive this third time around. And because Fury's been off for so long, because Fury is so volatile, because Fury usually when he's in, the front runner, John Dealey mentioned this to me, and he made a good point. Like right after he beat Klitschko when he was the champion, the pressure of being champion seemed as though it got to him. So now he's the champion. He's not the underdog this time. He doesn't have as much to fight for this time. He fights, to me, it seems as though he fights better when he's the underdog. He fights better when people don't think he's going to win. He fights better when his back is up against the wall as opposed to when he's more in control. So him going into this fight as the favorite, him already knowing that he knocked out Deontay Wilder, and because he has these issues psychologically he's shown to have in the past, and because we've seen him kind of partying a little bit, even though he looks in shape, he has been training, but he's also partying a little bit. Who knows what his mental psyche is going to be going into this third fight? What if he's off this third fight and Deontay Wilder is on? So I don't think this is such a horrible fight. And if there wasn't a fight between Fury and Joshua, this is the next best thing, in my opinion. And I think a lot of people agree with me. So Bob Arum is not stupid. He understands law. He's been dealing with contracts his whole life. He's been doing this for over 50 years. So he knows. He knows what's going on. And you hear me say things like unconscionable contract, force majeure. Beeb, you're just talking out of your ass. But I mean, I took business law in college, got a B plus in it. This is my law book that I use, and I look up a lot of things in this book when I have questions about contracts or stuff. And to be quite honest with you, I was saying for months that I thought that Wilder was going to win this arbitration. And I used words like unconscionable contract. I used words like force majeure. And I wasn't just pulling these words out of my ass. The force majeure is basically when a judge can look at a contract and say that extenuating circumstances that were unforeseen had an impact or interfered with the contract being able to be fulfilled. So if he decides that because of an unforeseen extenuating circumstance occurred that prevented that person from fulfilling that contract or honoring that contract, he can say that, because of the outside unforeseen circumstances, this contract could not have been fulfilled the way it was written. And obviously, we had COVID, and then we had Bob Arum continuously saying in the press that we need to put this fight in front of a live crowd. Wilder wasn't saying that. Nobody from Wilder's camp was saying that. That was coming from one side. So that's evidence that is going to be used to say, but I'm sure Deontay Wilder, whoever represented him at that arbitration, I don't know if he spoke for himself. I don't know if he had people speaking for him. I don't know if he had a lawyer with him, but they had the evidence, and they were going to always be able to use that. Well, Bob Arum kept saying that we need to put this in front of a live crowd. So it seemed as though he kept stalling this fight in the hopes that he could just be able to put it in front of a live crowd. He was hoping the country would open up, and it took longer for the country to open up than what was expected. So obviously, the unforeseen, unplanned circumstance was COVID. Okay. And then you have what's called unconscionable contract, when a contract is unreasonable, right? Or it's heavily biased in one side's favor, right? So that, to some degree, could be applied here, because Bob Arum kept saying that the fight had to be in front of a live crowd, but because of COVID, it was unreasonable for them to be able to do that. And also, Deontay Wilder had an injury. So it was unreasonable to expect him to fight until he was fully recovered and rehabbed from that injury. Okay, so the judge is looking at all the circumstances here, and he's saying, from a reasonable perspective, what could be enforced here? What was reasonable to be enforced here, and what is not reasonable to be enforced here? So Deontay Wilder had a very, very, very strong case. And once again, Bob Arum having his experience in law, not just being an ambulance chaser, as I said earlier in the video, but he was a federal district court lawyer. He worked for the government. So he's not a dummy. In my opinion, he knew the arbitrator, obviously, like we mentioned her earlier. So he knew all along that this result was going to happen. I just believe that, or he would not have allegedly reserved that stadium in Las Vegas. And I also think that there was probably a little bad blood between him and Hearn, because he was pissed off that Hearn bid on that Teofimo Lopez George Kambosos fight. He was aggravated about that. So maybe part of him wanted to stick it to Eddie Hearn, right? Maybe he wanted to play mind games with Eddie Hearn. This is payback. Also, Bob Arum has had many issues with the people in the Middle East, offering to put up money for many of his fights, only to not be able to provide the funds, right? This is payback to Saudi. Like, why am I going to work with these people after all the aggravation and grief they've caused me in the past? Eddie Hearn is a competitor. Then you say, well, why was Eddie doing all the work? Eddie was doing all the work because Bob Arum never intended on putting this fight on. Never. So why is he going to put in work for something he never wanted? He never wanted this fight. Not now. Not in Saudi. Bob Arum is going to say, this is what I believe he wants to do. Because I think this Fury Wilder 3 fight is going to do great numbers. I think it's going to sell out the Allegiant Stadium. I think it's going to do very good pay-per-view numbers. I think it's going to generate a lot of revenue. I don't think the Joshua Usyk fight is going to do well. So what Arum is going to do is going to say, look at what our event did, and look at what your event did. Look what we can draw, and look what you drew. I'm not saying he's going to ask for more than 50-50, but what I do believe Arum is going to try to do here is try to justify and sell and explain that Fury has become a big draw here in the United States. We don't want to put this fight in Saudi. It may belong in the UK, but we can generate the most money here in Las Vegas with the amount of money we could charge for these ticket prices, because our pay-per-view prices are so high. Being able to stage it in Vegas and having it here in prime time would ensure that we're going to get the most pay-per-view buys we can get. You do it in Saudi, in the UK, in a different time zone, the American fans may not watch it, or not as many of the American fans would watch it as if it were in prime time. So Arum's thinking about himself first and foremost, which most people tend to do. You know what I mean? But the way he did this whole transaction, the way this whole thing played out was very underhanded. It was very sly, but it was just very easy to see. And you have to ask yourself this: why was there such a holdup with Saudi providing proof of funds? Part of me even thinks that Eddie Hearn wasn't 100% sure about how that arbitration was going to pan out. I have a hard time believing that Eddie Hearn wasn't somewhat skeptical of how that arbitration was going to be ruled and who was going to win that arbitration. That had to be in the back of Eddie Hearn's mind as well. For me to just sit there and say that, because Eddie Hearn's not a dummy either, for him to just take Bob Arum at his word, and everybody has an out here. Everyone has an alibi, and some people will take one side, and other people will take another side. You can't blame Wilder for anything. You can't blame Anthony Joshua for anything, but you can blame Fury. You can blame Bob Arum. I don't even think you can blame Frank Warren, because Frank Warren all along said, I don't know if this fight's going to happen. But you can blame him somewhat, because probably in the back of his mind, he knew all along that this fight wasn't going to happen, but he was just pretending that he didn't know it wasn't going to happen. So you can even give him a bit of the blame. Eddie Hearn, part of me even thinks that he knew this fight wasn't going to happen. But why did they go through all this aggravation? Well, why did Mayweather and Pacquiao, why did Top Rank and Mayweather go through all their BS for 5 years? What did they actually accomplish? Well, they made the fight much, much bigger than it would have initially been. So, Beeb, why did they do this? Well, both guys get a relatively easy fight in between for pretty decent money, right? And what have we been talking about for the last 4 months? Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury. So this is free promotion for them. So, Beeb, what did they get out of this? They kept their names in the headlines. They forced us to continue talking about them every day for like 4 months. All you got to do is look on YouTube. All you got to do is look at the press, how many articles were written, all the interviews that were done, conducted by the various people involved in the whole situation. So what they essentially did was made this fight bigger and bigger and bigger. And when the fight does happen next year, both guys and everyone involved is going to make a lot more money next year than they would have made this year. It was unrealistic to believe that they were just going to throw this whole thing together, that Saudi was going to be able to build this arena, which would have been an indoor arena. It couldn't have been an outdoor arena. And there was a reason for them holding back on the funds. Now, a couple things I heard were, you heard Eddie Hearn say, well, we're dealing with the same people. Well, you have no choice but to deal with the same people. Anybody that deals with Saudi Arabia, they deal with the same people. You have to go through the government. The government is the one that goes out and gets the investors. Now, what I heard was the original group of investors that the government used or for the Ruiz Joshua 2 fight, they were on board with this fight from what I heard in the beginning, but because of the uncertainty of COVID, then they pulled back. And then I heard that the government had to search out for new investors, the Saudi government. So there has been a lot of BS going on behind the scenes. So even still, people can say whatever they want. I am still not 100% sure. And if you were to ask me, do I think the funds were there? I don't think they were, because first the numbers were, first they said 150 million. Then they went, then they said it was 100 million. When people float these numbers out there, who knows if they're accurate or not? Many times when I ask Bob Arum about numbers, he says he has no idea what these people are talking about. So that's the thing. That's the thing. So I think that you can blame Bob Arum, you can blame Frank Warren, You can blame Tyson Fury for trolling and leading people to believe that this fight was going to happen. You can blame Eddie Hearn for telling everybody and promising that this fight was 100% done and it was close when it was never nowhere near to being close. But you can't blame Wilder for anything. You really can't blame Anthony Joshua for anything. Anthony Joshua didn't say anything. All he said was he wanted to fight. Anthony Joshua never said the fight was definitely going to happen. Anthony Joshua never said that, he was 100% sure the fight was going to happen. All he said was that he wanted to fight. Fury went out there and told the world that this fight is 100% happening. Right before the arbitration was completed and the results were revealed to the public, he went out and said that the fight was 100% happening, and he knew it wasn't. He knew it wasn't. So I think that Bob Arum knew. I think Frank Warren knew. I think Tyson Fury knew that the plan all along was to stall this whole thing out, keep our name in the headlines. We're going to use, Joshua's name. We're going to use this unification fight as promotion to keep our name in the headlines. And, we're just going to continue to make this fight bigger and bigger and bigger. And then when it does happen next year, we're going to end up making more money next year than we would have if the fight happened this year. That's just my opinion. That's just my opinion. And if you followed me for these last 2 months or 2.5 to 3 months, you could say and you could see that I've been consistent on this. I kept saying Bob Arum does not want this fight. He's leading. He's just dragging this out. I kept saying Wilder Fury 3 was going to happen. I kept saying it. I kept saying it and saying it and saying it. And I think Eddie Hearn may have known too. I can't say with 100% certainty that I think Eddie Hearn knew what the results of this arbitration were going to be, but for him to just say that he was comfortable with Bob Arum telling him that the arbitration wouldn't be a problem when the results weren't given yet. And how ironic is it that the arbitration itself was dragged out so long? Once again, this was a federal judge. This was a judge that Bob Arum, I'm not sure if he was a federal judge, but he was a judge. He was a very highly regarded, very reputable judge that Bob Arum has done business with in the past, that Bob Arum has had a relationship with in the past. So they could have been going back and forth, and they could have plans to have dragged this whole process out. They could have been talking together, and part of the plan between the arbiter and Bob Arum was to probably drag this thing out. And you're saying, well, Deontay Wilder was involved in this too. Yeah, that's true. But again, Bob Arum has a history with this person. Okay, could have had an influence in him dragging this out. He could have influenced him and asked him or suggest to him that maybe we drag this out a little bit, right? Because think about this. This arbitration was going on for months. And you have to say to yourself, why did this, why? It's almost like all the stars are lined up perfectly, right? They waited and waited and waited and waited and waited with everything. Right? Everybody just kept dragging everything out. Eddie Hearn kept saying next week, next week, next week, next week, next week. Saudi never actually provided proof of funds. So they were holding back, right? Everyone was holding back. And you mean to tell me that all this shit was just a coincidence? Really? I just don't see it. I just don't see it. So I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna hold firm on this belief and this opinion that This was the plan all along. It was the plan all along. So I think Joshua's going to fight Usyk, right? Wilder's going to fight Fury. The whole bullshit with the step aside money, that's never going to happen. Bob Arum is not gonna take $20 million and just give it to like and who even knows? Who even knows if that $20 million is even an accurate figure, right? Who even knows if that $20 million is an accurate figure? That's probably bullshit too. And to think that Deontay Wilder would just take that money, right, and essentially freeze himself out of the heavyweight division. Because think about this. If Deontay Wilder takes the money, he goes to the back of the line, right? He goes to the back of the line. Now, he's ranked number 1 by the WBC right now, I believe. They could make him the mandatory, or maybe they couldn't. Who knows what they would do? But these guys would freeze him out, because after all the things he said about Fury saying that he never wanted to fight him again, all the bad blood that Wilder and Joshua have and Eddie Hearn have, going through all those negotiations that failed, these guys would freeze Wilder out. And who knows? And I think Fury would beat Joshua, but what if Joshua were to win? Joshua is not going to be obligated to fight Wilder. So there's really makes no sense for him to step aside, because he ends up freezing himself out of the division. He ends up freezing himself out of the division. And there's no way Bob was going to put up 20 million. That I don't know where that number came from, but that's just totally outrageous. Oh yeah, we're just going to give you $20 million to not fight. Get the fuck out of here, bro. Get the fuck out of here. I mean, when Lennox Lewis stepped aside so Mike Tyson would fight Bruce Seldon for the WBA title, Tyson had to vacate the WBC title, and then they paid Lewis, and Lewis was able to fight for the vacant title. What's the upside for Wilder to take step aside? And again, it's not that $20 million figure. I'm just going to come out and say it. In my opinion, I'm extremely confident in saying that number is bullshit. There's no way Bob Arum was going to take $20 million and pay fucking Deontay Wilder that amount of money to not fight. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. Both Fury and Wilder reportedly got $28 million apiece when they fought. So he's just going to give him $20 million to not fight. That's fucking bullshit, bro. Come on. That's again, one lie leads to another, and to another, and to another. So if that number was being floated out there, then it's hard to believe that, because so many lies have been told here. So much deception. I have to say, I've seen a lot in boxing, and this really doesn't surprise me. But what I can say is this was the biggest scam that I've ever seen. The way this whole thing played out, and for how long this whole thing played out, I've never seen such deception before in my life ever transpire like this in the sport of boxing. I gotta be honest. Salute to you, Maestro. What's up, man? Good morning. I gotta be honest. That's just it. And I don't think anyone really. I think, like I said, the only people whose hands are clean here is Deontay Wilder's and Anthony Joshua's. I think that Tyson Fury destroyed his image right now in the UK. I don't think the people in the US are going to care that he did this, but the people in the UK are never going to forgive him for deceiving them. Bob Arum never had a great reputation, but he just made his reputation worse. Frank Warren, again, he doesn't come out of this looking good. Eddie Hearn, whether you believe he was in on it or not, at the very least, he looks extremely incompetent. He looks extremely incompetent to sit there and take a man at his word if he actually did. That's the thing. So I'm going to end it on this. I know Bob Arum never wanted this fight with Joshua in Saudi Arabia. Now, I don't think he ever wants to. I don't think he really wants to do business with Saudi Arabia, anyways. But I know he doesn't want Fury to fight Joshua now, especially after that long layoff. I think they feel more comfortable having a fight with Wilder, who's also been off for a long time, coming off an injury. A lot of unknowns there with Wilder. He could be worse than the second fighter. He may be better, but we already fought this guy twice. We know him. We feel pretty confident that we can beat him, and we can get a pretty decent payday in doing so. So there's a lot of reward here for little risk. At least it looks like that from their vantage point on the surface. So we accomplish a lot of things here. We get a big money fight, arguably probably going to be the biggest fight of the year, right? We get Tyson Fury active again, and we position him to be in a better place when he fights Anthony Joshua next year. Anthony Joshua gets, he doesn't really lose either. He gets a pretty decent payday for an easy fight, in my opinion, as well. Right? So once again, all these guys did was keep their name in the headlines for 4 months straight, day after day after day after day. They got so much press, so much promotion that this is only going to enhance this fight even more when it happens next year. So this is my opinion. This is why I believe why they did what they did. But Bob Arum comes out of this looking horrible. Tyson Fury comes out of this looking horrible. Frank Warren comes out of this looking bad. I'm not going to say may not be as come out of this looking as horrible as Fury and Arum, but Eddie Hearn comes out of this looking horrible as well too, because he looked extremely, extremely incompetent here. He made a statement that if I do not get this fight over the line, then everyone can give me stick. I'll take the blame. So we're going to have to give him the blame. So Eddie Hearn doesn't look good. Arum doesn't look good. Fury doesn't look good. And Frank Warren doesn't look good. And the sport of boxing, this is like a mosquito bite to the sport of boxing. I mean, if you've been following the sport long enough, you have to be used to this. You have to be somewhat jaded if you've been following the sport for a while. You have to expect this. I mean, history repeats itself. We've seen this time and time again, right? So we can't act surprised. I can't tell people how to feel about it. I can't tell people what to think about it. All I can do is give my perspective and give my observation on what I've seen, right? And pretty much the way I talked about this, it played out exactly as I said it would. It played out exactly how I said it would, right? Because I did not ignore the things I was seeing. I did not try to bury the things I was seeing. I wasn't going to ride the wave like everyone else or most people were trying to do. I wasn't going to make a decision based off emotion, or have an opinion based off emotion, I should say. Have an opinion based off of hope and dreams. Because most people want that instant gratification, and they'll do whatever they can to get that instant gratification. Most people look for that confirmation bias, right? So whenever you make these decisions based off of what you want and how you feel. Thank you, Maestro. He said, this is for Diet Coke. It can't be used on Diet Pepsi. Okay. You notice I don't have my beverage with me, so so there's no Diet Pepsi today. But yeah, I mean, when you take away the emotion, the feelings, and you allow the objectivity, you allow the logic, you allow the common sense to shine through, then it's almost impossible to look at this situation and say to yourself that it wasn't planned and that this is what these guys didn't want. Like this is what these guys wanted all along. It's almost impossible to not think that. So yeah, so people are gonna be emotional about this. People are gonna say this, they're gonna say that. But here's the thing: we still don't know if that money was there, right? Because they weren't gonna provide the proof of funds, right? So that's something that you know you, I still have suspicions about, right? So I don't know. We'll never know. We'll never fully know the truth because, like I said, one lie usually leads to another, to another, to another, to another. Who knows how much of this was bullshit, and if there even was a sliver of truth involved in all this. But one thing I can say, the media was extremely irresponsible here. They were extremely irresponsible here because they just went with they they just went with whatever was going to get them clicks. They used this fight or this potential fight with Fury and Joshua as well for clicks. They were saying they were saying things like this fight is definitely happening. They were saying things like the contracts were signed. They were saying things that they knew that weren't true, just so people would click on them and read the shit. So they're they're not without blame either. There were certain people that reported on this accurately. I got to shout out Dan Raphael because he reported on it accurately. He was very skeptical of the fight happening. I know Lance Pugmire, he was skeptical as well, but you had the usual suspects out there that were thirsty, and they were gonna just put out the sexy story so they can get clicks. And no one, and a lot of people were afraid to come out and say that everything was bullshit because they didn't want to, because this was because you then the narrative was you didn't want the fight to happen. People were shaming you because, oh, how could you not want this fight to happen? I mean, it was so ridiculous, man. It was just so ridiculous how this whole thing played out. And one thing that I can say that I walk away from this whole situation, one thing that I can say is this whole situation left me really losing even more respect for the boxing media than I had prior. I didn't have much respect for the boxing media before this, but now after this, I have even less respect for the boxing media. Even the way they handled the whole Billy Joe Saunders thing, I think, was a disgrace too. The way these people act as PR people and surrogates, you know, the way these people act as surrogates and PR people is disgraceful. And if you're caping for one side, you can't go and say that the other side is biased if you're part of a tribe. Everybody wants to be part of a tribe. Everybody is about tribalism now. Everything's about groups, right? Well, this side is perfect, but the other side is the bad guy. Let's be honest. Let's be honest. All promoters block fights. All promoters put on shit fights. All promoters BS. All promoters exaggerate. All promoters lie. Everybody involved in this sport, nobody can go without criticism for the most part. I hate using terms like everybody and all, but there's very few people in this sport that you can say are don't have any dirt on their hands, to put it bluntly. You gotta be honest. You got to be truthful. You can look at anybody and you could say, um, in this situation, the right thing wasn't done, right? You could say that the right thing wasn't done. You can blame everybody. You could look at every single out, platform. You could look at every single promoter. You can criticize anybody. It's not just one versus the other. All right, you can't say one is better than the other when they're all pretty much doing the same things, right? The sport has always had a cloud hanging over it. People want to go back and say, "Oh, well, what back in the day it was so much better." Was it really better back in the day when you had the mob running it, when you had people taking dives, when you had people taking bribes? Was it really better? Oh, well, they fought better. They fought much better opposition back then. Really? Did anyone ever take a look at? And this is no disrespect. This is an observation. This is factual information. Did anyone ever go back and look at Sugar Ray Robinson's record? He was the middleweight champion, but he was fighting every month, but he was fighting guys that were like 0-10, 1-16, 5-80. These guys had non-title fights in between title fights. They just kept active. So instead of sparring in the gym and getting their working in the gym to stay sharp, they basically had paid sparring sessions. Julio Cesar Chavez used to go back to Mexico and fight in non-title fights too. Joe Louis with his Bum of the Month club. I mean, so again, you can argue that fighters had it tougher back then without question, because fighters don't have the situation. They're not in the situations. They're more in control of their career. In other words, like fighters have become more business savvy. Fighters now are being taken advantage of less than they were back then, because it was easier for people to exploit fighters back then. But at least now, with the Muhammad Ali Act, and although that's never ever been enacted, but you see fighters now in better positions from a business standpoint. Now they seem to be more involved in their career. They know how to promote themselves. You have social media, so boxers are in a better place now than they were back then. It's harder for a boxer to be exploited now as opposed to back in the day. So yeah, those guys had it rough. We don't even have to talk about Jack Johnson and what he had to go through. That's a story in itself. That's pretty evident. But at the end of the day, you can go back if you do the research, and there's always been fights that people wanted to see that didn't happen when they wanted them to happen. So you just can't look at it now and say, "Oh, what's wrong with the boxers today?" Well, again, if you took Sugar Ray Robinson and you put him in this era, this was a guy who said that he never really liked boxing. I don't like fighting. I only do it for the money. I do it because I can. I do it because I'm good at it. He never won. He wasn't. He didn't love fighting. Muhammad Ali. I hate training. So these guys. I'm not trying to disparage these guys in any way, but if you were to put these guys in today's climate, if these guys could jump in a time machine, if Sugar Ray Robinson was fighting today under these conditions, I guarantee you he would not have 202 fights. If he could make the amount of money in 2 fights that he was making fighting 10 times a year, he would do it. So, you got to put things in context, right? You just got to look at things for the way they are. You got to be honest. All right, we're starting to go down another rabbit hole here, but like I said, I'm gonna close with this. I hope people learned a lesson from this, that when you see history repeating itself, don't ignore it. Don't be manipulated by the press. Don't be manipulated by these promoters. Don't be manipulated by any, always question and be skeptical of what you're hearing. In other words, don't fall for the friggin' okey doke. Just remember that this has happened time and time again. So don't allow these guys to manipulate you anymore. Just open your eyes. Use your head, not your heart all the time. All right. Beeb is out. Talk to y'all soon. Have a great day. Peace out. And like I said, make sure you check me out on the Ringside Reporter podcast every Sunday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time with Eric Lord. And make sure you check me out on the Roundtable with D Style on Thursdays at 8 o'clock on Thursdays. Make sure you check me out on D Style's channel. I'll be doing a lot of work with him as well. Till next time, Beeb is out. Talk to y'all soon. Peace out. Enjoy the rest of your day. And as always, stay safe.